So understanding pedagogy to activate change in youths is important. In the history of British and US colonies, the history of teaching non-white students has been an ugly one. Just as the history of the colonized, epistemological wealth is powerful, thus valued. Just as super straight languages and gluing it all together is a deep-seated discriminatory ethnocentric belief that the elites are the only sophisticated and cultured people. In their view, anyone who is not wealthy is inferior and can only mimic sophistication. The upper class have always ensured to keep wealth, to ensure that the poor not only remain poor, but to ensure the poor keep losing treasures such as language, culture, and identity. Those high with power weave intricate belief systems like religion and de facto social systems to deceive, to ensure generational struggles, and to maintain the deep-seated cognitive dissonance among the poor. ESL has unfortunately been painted in association with poor children, uneducated children, mentally challenged children, deficient children, and the pedagogy has always been one to only accommodate elitist, hegemonic discourses. I love Paulo Freire. In his book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, he eloquently gives some of these hegemonic systems at play in the classroom a name. One is the banking concept, as mentioned before, where the teacher is a doctor present to test pathology and provide band-aid medicine that only treats the symptoms instead of the disease. The student, the patient, is clearly deficient, meek, and weak in their view. This bank clerk education of the depositing to the student is called the pedagogy of the oppressed. This teacher-centered approach serves the interests of the oppressor, who cares neither to have the world revealed nor to see it transformed. And this is Freire, I'm quoting. Paulo Freire sharpened my attention with his metaphoric, grotesque image comparing oppression to necrophilia, the love and pleasure with what is dead. The student is dead if he is alienated, as in a grave, with no voice or brain to question authority. There is hope. Instead, he advocates for problems-posing education. Through the student's discourses and dialogues, the teacher of the student and the student of the teacher cease to exist, and the new term emerges, which is teacher-student with student-teachers. Freire speaks of the emergence of consciousness and critical intervention in reality. In this dramatic shift, the student is now alive and awakened, speaker, reader, writer of his world to change his world and rewrite to replace normative hegemonic discourses. This speaks for itself. Teachers need to be active critical inquirers and doers in order to ensure we are gatekeepers of society. Students learn best by example. In Chapter 2, Making Sense of Pedagogy, in the book Understanding Pedagogy, developing a critical approach to learning, Waring and Evans explore and explain the complex concept of pedagogy for axiological emancipatory interests. They echo that educators must understand how pedagogy, at an organic level, informs instructors on how to view their positions as professionals of today and tomorrow. Educators should be consciously and actively engaged in what and how our future learners' interests being acknowledged and addressed in the curricula and schooling. Pedagogy is a critical act of inquiry by the teacher to promote student learning. They rightly observe that pedagogy is certainly not a neutral landscape. It is very much about a social critical agenda, one in which notions of learner empowerment are framed by those power relationships that revolve around how knowledge is conceptualized and therefore what knowledge is valued, and how learners are positioned in relation to how that knowledge is created as part of the pedagogical process. I love this quote. It has me cathartic. It reminds me of the novels I read during my secondary education. None reflected my culture. I suspected it, felt ignored, voiceless, and on the brink of erasure if I had quit school. I almost dropped out. Many days I felt as if I did not belong in school. I wanted to learn, but I also wanted to belong. Lisa Del Pitt, another awesome writer, is an excellent advocate for multicultural pedagogy in the classroom. Children are individuals and cannot be made to fit into any preconceived mold of how they act, but rather how to recognize when there is a problem for a particular child and how to seek its cause. In this light, she lists 5 ways that schools push culturally diverse children into danger zone, all of which I just cannot argue against. 1. Failure to recognize and address problems, and when these problems are investigated, the school dismiss students' learning styles and students' style of language, etc. The second is stereotyping. Stereotyping students puts students at great risk. It denies students the change to be who they are. 3. Interpreting a child's failure to academically excel as deficiencies in the child instead of deficiencies in teaching pedagogy. 4. Maintaining ignorance about practices within cultural communities. The ignorance can cause big misunderstandings. And number 5 is the most impactful, making invisible the histories and realities of children and communities of color in the curriculum and in the educator's mind. This is important to me because while there are a lot of Spanish novels and stories, none reflect my reality, none reflect the triumph and struggles Mestizo people face within the Belizean context. Of course, the easy answer is Belizean Mestizo people need to start producing their own books. But we can start by using some of these Spanish novels in the classroom to nurture the culture, language, and identity within Mestizo students. And this is the same for Maya, Creole, and Garifuna. Many are forgetting the language or prefer not to engage or not to acknowledge that they speak Spanish or Maya or Garifuna or whatever language it is. Having addressed pedagogy, the concept of pedagogy, advocating for the multicultural demographics, educators need to know what tools they can use to foster multicultural learning, even in virtual classrooms. Another writer, Shockley and Orellana, discuss how to become aware of cultural differences, ways to stimulate cultural awareness, among other topics, to ensure that educators are tapping into students' schema. I particularly enjoyed noting the various technological tools she highlighted as potential tools to use to stimulate discussions and unity while respecting and acknowledging the cultural rich perspectives our students bring to the classroom. Shockley and Orellana expound, and I'll quote, "Cultural awareness is a critical component of pedagogical practice in blended and virtual settings." Close quote. Another way to get students interested and excited about learning is to have them share their experiences. They continue that culturally responsive pedagogy and funds of knowledge are dynamic combinations of knowledge of students that the teacher must collect to better serve them. Funds of knowledge are historically accumulated and culturally developed bodies of knowledge and skills that students hold and they bring to the classroom. Teachers don't tap into that. That is, if the teacher uses them, the student will be aware and feel embraced. Thus, learning flourishes in the classroom. I plan to speak on many topics that make us uneasy. We need to start discussing them for healing to begin. It is not surprising then that these complexities and deficiencies continue to exist in the classroom because we don't talk about it. If we allow the demons of the past to linger in the present, Yosso says we must stop ignoring the white elephant in the room. Ignoring it is too costly, promoting our own oppression on our own children. It is allowing those demons to also plague our people for generations to come. We must address the elephant in the room, address the side effects of the oppression, the deficiencies caused, rehabilitate, and plan to rectify these deficiencies, banishing these demons. It has been said that with much power comes great responsibility. And I know you know who said that. We teachers have the power to make or break our students. We must take that responsibility serious. When we explore the themes of language, literacy, and culture, I inevitably think about my two girls. I empower them with the Spanish and English language because it is a beautiful tool that promotes universality, citizens of the world. I nurture them with literacy because it is the art of attaining competency in any content area they choose. I grow them in culture because it is where the collective talents and art pieces and consciousness of their ancestry spring, a solid foundation for strong roots to grow. In the end, as an educator who has experienced the pedagogy of the oppressed, I see the need to replace this deficit thinking by producing our own literature depicting our rich cultural wealth. Hegemonic powers have abused and misused resources to worsen our educational, political, racial, cultural, language, and literacy conditions. Today, we can counter this oppression peacefully with culturally relevant pedagogy and problem-posing education. The message I want to leave you with is that today we can counter this oppression peacefully with culturally relevant pedagogy and problem-posing education. Jean-Francois Lyotard says that we now need to be subjectivists with extreme anti-realism, social constructivism, and radical promotion of differences and non-normativity discourses. Lyotard promotes the idea of petit récits, small collective stories looking at the reality of the marginalized and oppressed. As I learned from G's assertion, if I want others to know who my people are, what they do, and how they contribute to building beliefs, then I got to develop, promote, and produce that discourse to enlighten others in the forms of books and other forms, paintings. I end with Thurman's quote, "Don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive and go do it, because what the world needs is people who have come alive." Thank you for listening.